Now that you've found UBN Radio and discovered our quality talk shows, it's time to spread the word to friends, family, and the universe. 24 hours of music and talk. Radio without limits. That's why people keep coming back for more. That's UBNradio.com.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome back to the Larry Exercise Show. Just in case you're wondering, this is he, this is I, this is all of us wrapped up into one little small package called The Good Guy. Anyway, I'm so glad to be back here on the air. I think I may have missed last week, and it's lots to talk about. And I want to thank you guys for all the emails and stuff that I got. A lot of good emails, and some of you guys went kind of crazy on the old boy. I mean, you know, I'm from Mississippi. I dropped out of school in the 6th grade. I can't pronounce all my words right. So, but I do think someone sent me a lovely email and spelled out a word for me to help me pronounce the word correctly. And I love that, but I'm still not going to do it. Anyway, it's lots to talk about. There's a little bit of sadness in the air here, a little bit of sadness. And what I did with this powerful young man that is a guest here today, and with his story and the journey that this young man is on, I think it deserves as much time as this show can give it, because this show we are now restricted to the 50 minutes, so I generally am not going to be able to go over. So, and there's so much, and we know how fast this time just happens to fly by. You know, as I always say, you know, it's funny how time flies when you're learning something. So, anyway, but I do have to say, you know, with the political climate in the country and with what's going on with the Republican Party and the going behind the president's back and all of that political stuff, and then the Ferguson. And I would love to get into detail about that. And so we're going to do that another day. And I know I'm not saying, I'm not disregarding how important those stories are. And I know that the Ferguson, and what I will do is send out my prayers to the police officer, because I don't condone the violence. That we are making some progress, people. And those of you that is listening to the show, and those of you that may hear about my message, that we are making some progress. And let the system work itself through. But the violence and shooting police officer is not the way. No matter how strong or how powerful or how militant that you in your little mind think it is, shooting at the police officer and shooting cops is not the way to do that. And so the one thing that I want to say is that all we need to do, not all we need to do, one of the things we need to do is just start to educate ourselves about what to vote for, how to vote, and get active in your community in Ferguson and throughout the United States. Getting active in your community means doing some research on the people that's voting for office. Don't just vote for the president. Vote for your local state government, from your school, your judges, to your city councilman. Get out and vote. Let your vote talk. Don't let violence be your voice anymore. We don't need that. And having to say that, one of the most important things we can do when we use the word educate ourselves. We have a young man in the house right now, Mr. Ivor Dawson.
That's correct.
Give me a little hand clap here. Give me some hand claps here. We got Ivor Dawson in the house, and this is the Traveling Space Museum, which is all about education. Absolutely. And I've heard about your program, and thank you so much for coming to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Yes. How have you been?
I've been great.
You,
I've loved our little pre-show conversation.
I tell
We were
you,
all over the place.
well, we was all over the place. This
You know?
man is so fascinating, and one of the reasons I love doing this show, because I get to meet such interesting people, and I got to tell you, you are unique in this order, and I love everybody that comes on this show, and everybody have their own uniqueness, but you bring something very special to the show, and talking about space, what got you there?
Wow.
And then tell us a little bit
Wow.
about what you're doing.
What got me there? Like a lot of people, I was a youngster watching science fiction on television. My favorite show when I was a kid, and I go back to the early 50s, Rocky Jones Space Rangers. Rocky Jones Space Rangers, absolutely. But also my upbringing, my background as a foster child, I was born black and poor.
That's shocking.
Born in Spanish Harlem, and to unwed parents, and was a board student, and I dropped out of college. But I used all of these advantages that God gave me.
So they weren't stumbling blocks. They were stepping stones.
Absolutely, they were all stepping stones. All stepping stones. I happened to have a foster brother who was 2 years older than I was and intellectually gifted, who his own parents were brothers and sisters who were teachers. So they would tell Larry stories, and Larry would tell me stories.
You heard the name Larry? Does that sound familiar to anybody?
No, unfortunately, it wasn't Larry Yates.
I know.
But Larry Wilson, as a youngster, before he was going to school, was telling me the Iliad and the Odyssey, telling me stories of Bible stories. So I heard these old stories the way they were supposed to be heard. They were told to me rather than read to me. So I was always interested in history. I was always interested in science.
Let me ask you a question.
That got me going.
Let me ask you a question, because last week and the week before last, we had a wonderful young lady on the show that is working in the LA school district, and we had a conversation about foster parents.
Yes.
And then a lady called in and asked us a question about becoming a foster parent, and I made a statement that I be sure that you sit down and become a match as a foster parent to the foster child. Make sure that you have an energy, a spiritual match to that child. That way, you have a better chance of being more and more being successful as a parent. Were you a good match with your foster parent?
I thought I was great. It was good and bad. Okay, first of all, my foster mother was still on the scene, although my birth mother had given up her custodial rights to her children, so we were all went into different foster homes. And she was battling bipolar disease and depression. She could not raise her own children. So my older brother and older sister ended up in separate homes. My foster parents, as I was telling you earlier, my foster father was born in 1898. Raymond Branham.
Oh,
he
God.
knew Civil War veterans.
Oh, my goodness.
My foster mother was born in St. Thomas in 1909. So I'm a 3-year-old living in their home with the original old school parents. I told you earlier, when my dad said, "Hey, I come from the old school,"
he wasn't kidding.
He wasn't kidding. No, as a matter of fact, I thought it was a tabernacle. Literally, he brought out the old King James Bible, the biggest book in the world, and it turned out to be the Bible that he learned to read on. And I learned to read, "Thou art thine," and I brought this language into the school. You know, what is thy
So how did you get
desires and
into, what was so fascinating about the space program that you, now, so in fact, tell the people, the listeners, exactly what do you do?
Yeah. The
What
traveling,
does this traveling museum
I
do?
am the founder and president of the Traveling Space Museum. And basically what the Traveling Space Museum is a museum that is created in the public schools. What we do is we bring a 50-foot trailer of a dozen or more different exhibits, full scale, set them up in the schoolyard, sometimes in the classrooms, in the auditoriums, in the cafetoriums, in the libraries, and we turn the typical public school into a space museum.
Oh, wow.
And we can do that for a day, 2 days, a week, whatever the budget the school district can afford, we're there on scene. So we literally, kids come into school. If they didn't know we were coming, they are totally shocked to see a full-scale spaceship, a jet fighter. We brought the first military jet onto a school ground.
Oh, my God.
And just getting it is its own story. But, yeah, we brought
But
it.
let me ask you something.
Yeah.
I mean, you'll find that I'm going to step in a little bit
No,
just for the
go
sake
ahead.
of time.
Go ahead.
You mentioned something that I thought was fascinating, that when the kids know that you guys are coming there, it stimulates them to read and study more about space and aerospace and
Yes.
and the whole bit. Tell us a little bit about that concept.
We're always being asked, well, what books should the students be reading? And anything on space is helpful because most children really don't know anything about the space program. When they canceled the shuttle program, the most popular question I got was, is the space program over? Because they just assume that the space shuttle is the only part of our space program. So,
And your answer to that is?
My answer is the space program continues. There's an international space station. We are dependent on the Russians to bring our astronauts to the International Space Station for the time being. But astronauts are still being trained. And one of the things that I wanted to do was to teach students the same way that astronauts are being taught, a process that I call learning like an astronaut.
Now that is and you and I were talking about that early on, and I am so glad you brought that up because I just think that is absolutely fascinating. And this about the simulators and the whole bit.
Yes. So
please explain that.
Our exhibits. It's when I say bring museum items to a school, they're not just static exhibits to look at. We built these items custom made for our use so that students are invited to climb inside, climb on top of, operate the controls. These simulators work the same way that NASA astronauts learn from simulators. Just for a little background for your audiences.
Please go ahead.
When World War II started, we were caught by surprise. We needed 100,000 pilots yesterday. Okay, and the average reading level of a typical recruit, 18 years old, was about 5th grade. Half of the recruits were raised on farms. Many of them had dropped out of grade school or middle school, and now the training manual for flying an airplane was 3 inches thick.
Oh my God!
So, a gentleman named Edward Link, in the 1930s, had created what he called the Link Trainer, and it was a simulator. It was basically a box that operated the way an airplane operates. So a pilot can learn how to fly by sitting inside the simulator. He could pull the yoke back and climb. He can push it down and dive. He was literally sitting on organ bellows. And as compressed air moved underneath this box, it could roll side to side or pitch up and down.
So they could get the whole feel, the body, the
feel of
mental.
it. Exactly.
Yes.
So what they were learning, unbeknownst to them at the time, they were learning what we now know as muscle memory. You put someone in a real airplane, and the same amount of energy, the right touch, has been perfected in that simulator. So when they're really in an airplane and flying for real, they have the feel.
And the muscle memory to compensate for what they may not have read.
Exactly. And there's nothing in a text that simulates
That's true.
that feeling. Okay. Now, fast forward NASA is created in 1959. The military uses that same methodology for teaching, and that gets passed on to NASA. NASA uses simulators, plus they also invite experts in every field that they want the astronauts to learn. These experts are brought in to coach the astronauts.
So in this case, the student is not just relying on one expert to come in and deal with them.
So when the Traveling Space Museum comes to a school, very often they're being taught about aeronautics and different science disciplines from experts, usually pilots, sometimes astronomers, different experts in different fields. So we're not doing what the general public school system does, having one teacher try to know a little bit about everything.
Yes.
We bring in guest experts. So this process of expert instructors and simulators is the secret behind the Traveling Space Museum. And the reaction that the students have. Now, you mentioned earlier the idea that the students are anticipating our coming.
Mm-hmm.
They know that we're coming weeks before, so there's a run on the school library for anything having to do with space.
I love that.
The teachers are being bugged by the students. I want a book, or where do I find out about this, or where do I go on the internet to find out about that? And the teachers are literally being inundated. So what happens once we arrive is other extraordinary happenings. Students turning in book reports for books the teacher didn't know the students were reading. I had one teacher say to me, "We didn't even know Johnny could read." And he turned in a 2-page book report.
So what is it that you think about space? Is that just an innate thing that's built into mankind from birth?
Well, you talked about the cavemen.
Yes.
And the cave paintings. And the first things that cavemen sat in awe of at night was looking up at the stars.
Yes.
Seeing meteorites flash through the atmosphere. Watching the star patterns change.
Because me as a kid coming up in the South, and I tell you, this brings me back to some of the happier times in my country of Mississippi, is that we would get together with my grandmother, and because we didn't have to worry about cars running us over in the middle of the night, maybe a wild deer or something, but we would lay down in the middle of the road at night, and stare up at the stars, the whole family. It had to be the most beautiful thing, and you helped me remember that. I hadn't even thought of that.
Yeah.
We'd be out in the country, and and we would all look up, just pointing at stars, and just that wish you, and I wonder what is out there, and what would it be like to fly out there. And then along comes Star Trek, to whom you worked very closely with. Miss, help me with the name again.
Nichelle Nichols.
Miss Michelle Nichols. Tell us about that.
Well, that was an interesting circumstance. Growing up and being a science fiction fan, that was the most anticipated new show of the season. In 1966, I was 15 years old. Everybody's trying to figure out what to do on the weekend and getting dates and whatever, and I'm sitting around. I'm a nerd. I'm waiting. I'm waiting for this new series to start up called Star Trek, and the idea of aliens and
I still can't see you as a nerd, but go ahead. But go ahead. I'm sorry.
Absolutely. So. It's funny because with the recent passing of Leonard Nimoy, I get a lot of people who are asking me, what was, how did Star Trek affect me and the like. And I had the experience of having James T. Kirk himself ask me that question.
Get out of here.
What did Star Trek mean to you? Oh, yeah. I had never been to a Star Trek convention. And but I was traveling with Nichelle Nichols on some NASA business, and she said, "Listen, I'm doing the Star Trek convention in New Jersey. Why don't you meet up with me and we'll just have breakfast and we'll go our separate ways." And as it would happen, William Shatner was doing interviewing people on how Star Trek changed their life. And Nichelle Nichols said to me, wait a minute, I want you to meet Bill.
Oh, wow.
I said,
Meet
well,
Bill?
I said, well, so I have no idea what she's doing. And she says, oh, Bill, come here. I want you to meet a big Star Trek fan. And he says, oh, so he's a fan. I was. But he says, so let's mic him up. Put a mic on him. I feel like I'm in a Priceline commercial now. And then he says, okay, what does Star Trek mean to you? And I'm thinking 10 seconds before that, I'm thinking, what am I going to say that hasn't been said by 10 million trekkers, for 20 years? And all of a sudden I say, I've been trying to explain my foster family concept to people and them not understanding the idea of foster brothers coming and going out of a household, or someone saying, hey, he looks different than you, or he's lighter than you, or this other one is darker than. How could that be your brother? And I said, they're all my brothers and sisters. Mm-hmm. So when Star Trek came on, I was able to say, well, we're like Star Trek.
I love that.
Star Trek was the perfect foster family.
Oh, wow.
Well, now I'm telling this. This is what's tumbling out of my mouth in an interview, such like we're talking right now. And Shatner jumps from the seat and says, cut. He said, this is exactly what we're looking for. And all of a sudden, there's the audience behind me erupts. And I turn around, and there's 100 people in costumes applauding.
Oh, my goodness.
They're starting to bum rush me with autographs. Could I get your autograph? I said, what is this? I just gave. They said, oh, but you just told the great Star Trek story of all time. I said, get out of here.
I had never heard it put like that. And I've heard many interviews and many people talking about what Star Trek meant to them. And let me ask you a question. Yeah. God, time is going to go by so fast on this one. But now take us back to you was in the entertainment. You was a promoter.
Yes. Well, all of this Traveling Space Museum is really Buffalo Bill's Wild West show of the 21st century.
Tell us about how when the first seed of this was planted.
Oh, that's interesting, because I was waiting in line at the New York City World's Fair. Waiting in line to see the General Motors Futurama ride. I'm 13 years old, and the big attraction at the World's Fair is this vision of the future, a journey into the future with General Motors. And I'm waiting 2 hours for a 15-minute experience.
Oh, wow.
And I'm thinking, this is crazy. Now, this is something else I wanted to talk about, the gift of boredom. I talked about being bored.
The gift of boredom. I love that.
Children aren't bored anymore. Now, they say if necessity is the mother of invention, then boredom's got to be the daddy.
It has.
Okay? You put a child who's bored, or anybody who's bored, put them in a situation where there's nothing to read, there's no cell phone to do a gadget, play a game. All of a sudden, he starts to think. Yes. So I'm thinking, if I had a chance to do a exhibit in a museum or do an attraction like this World's Fair thing, how would I do it differently so that I'm not waiting in line for 2 hours? And that is really the genesis of the Traveling Space Museum.
But at one point you had a first event. What was that first thing that you actually ended up doing? You told me about finding a suit from the movie theaters.
Okay. One of the things I had to do is come up with concepts that I thought students, young people would be attracted to. And I had the opportunity with contacts in the Hollywood, the film industry. In the Valley, there was a prop shop called Wonderworks. And there was a gentleman who was a co-founder of Wonderworks, who was doing what I ended up doing, but just doing it occasionally. Mm-hmm. He would bring, he'd built a Mercury space capsule, full-scale Mercury space capsule for the movie Space Camp.
Oh, wow.
And he said, it would be a great idea if young people could go and see this. But I don't have the time. I'm making movies. I'm trying to do deals. you know. And I said, well, I'd like to take that Mercury capsule and bring it out. So we took it. I for $100, I don't know, some ridiculous price. He said, well, you know, when you're renting equipment for movies, they want thousands of dollars for a week. I said, I just need it one day. I've got an opportunity to do a lecture at the school in Compton. And he said, well, okay, you're doing it for school, you know, you just pay the insurance value on it, $100 or whatever. I said, okay. So I trucked this 7-foot tall Mercury capsule thing, full scale, bring it down to the school in Compton. And the kids are going nuts.
Oh, wow.
Because I can open the hatch, they can look inside, they can see the instrument panel, they could see the fact that one very short person could fit inside this thing and orbit the Earth for days on end. And that reminds me of another circumstance that I get asked a lot. How did I go to the bathroom in space?
Yes, how?
Well, the traveling, as it would happen, thank you very much, Mr. Yates. As it would happen, the Traveling Space Museum has the only traveling exhibit of the space shuttle space toilet system.
Get out of here.
Yes. And it is fully interactive. And the great shock is when you flush a space toilet, the vacuum, the suction that you feel below your butt is a sensation that's very memorable. But that's what education is all about.
That's what education is about.
Okay, so when I bring these items to schools, and so I bring in this Mercury space capsule, and I found another shop called Global Effects. They gave me the same deal. If I pay the insurance value of the prop, I could take it around to schools for a day. So I'm bringing in this full-scale space suit, an EVA suit. This is what astronauts use outside the spaceships or doing a spacewalk. And we put one of the teachers inside the spacesuit. And this spacesuit, it was featured in Space Cowboys.
Okay.
And other.
So these was
other
actually suits that was worn on movie sets.
They're replica suits.
Yeah. So they had some fame attached to them.
They had fame associated with them, and I thought, oh, that's cute. You know, this movie. It was some movie called Space Cowboys that the kids saw, or one of the TV series. But the reaction that the students had, seeing the teacher that they've known for years, now she's in a spacesuit.
Oh my
They're
goodness.
touching her. They're touching her like she's an alien. They want to feel the texture of the material. She's wearing it. She's got an actual portable air conditioning unit that cools down.
That's a priceless stimulant for the kids.
That prop piece is worth $1 million. It's not a real spacesuit. It's just a full, highly high fidelity space prop.
Yeah,
reproduction
of it.
4 films. But you can get hot very quickly in this suit. So, I told the teacher, well, if you just get in it for a few minutes. I had to talk her into the suit. And then once the air conditioning unit started up and she could lower the visor. The visor is a real layer of gold.
Oh, my goodness.
And the students went nuts. Then at the end of the day, we had to talk her out of the space. Because she spent the entire day walking around the campus with 80 pounds of space.
And was loving it.
And was loving every moment of it.
Now, for the sake of time, because I can't forget.
Yes.
Buzz Aldrin.
Yes, sir.
Tell us about how you got to meet a legend, a man of that stature.
Well, Buzz Aldrin is, in fact, he's a legend in our own time.
Yes.
As one of the first 2 men on the moon. And I was fortunate enough to be working with an organization called the California Space Authority that had seen the Traveling Space Museum in action and decided that they would I guess I was nominated for an award, and eventually they decided that the Traveling Space Museum in 2008 should be given the Buzz Aldrin Award for Excellence in Space Education. And so I got to actually receive the Buzz Aldrin Award from Buzz Aldrin.
He actually presented it to you.
Presented it to me, and I've gotten to know him, and we've done a number of events together.
As an African American kid, I don't know.
Yes.
Did we tell this story on air about why your foster parent father said that you probably was not going to be an astronaut? I think we talked
we didn't.
about that off air.
We went off the air
Yes.
with that. As a 9-year-old, I kept pestering my father about wanting to be an astronaut.
And the reason I want you to tell that story because I want to tie it into finally meeting a Buzz Aldrin.
Yes.
So tell us about that story.
I had always wanted to be an astronaut. I can, since the age of 3-4 years old, watching these TV programs, and I thought this was the ultimate adventure. And during this time, Walt Disney is promoting space exploration on the new Disneyland shows and the Wonderful World of Color shows and stuff.
Rocky and all these.
So all of these things are happening in the middle 50s and towards the late. And this all predates NASA. So as a young person, 5-6 years old, I am getting all of this. I'm immersed in all of this stimuli, and I decide, you know what? I want to be a pilot and I want to be an astronaut. And Daddy, how do you do it? How do you become an astronaut? And he kept on, well, son, I'll tell you one day. And I don't want to wait. I want you to help me become an astronaut. And he said, okay, I'll do it on one condition. We're going to church on Sunday, and we lived in the South Bronx, but our church was Transfiguration Church in Harlem. And it was a 10 or 12 mile trip. And I said, well, Dad said, if you spot a black face on a billboard while we're driving to church, I will support you becoming an astronaut. And I thought, oh, this is great. You know, we're going into Harlem. This is the
got to
biggest.
Be a billboard there.
There's got to be a billboard with a black face on it. Besides which, Harlem is the largest black community in America. And I'm passing one block after another. No, there's white people smoking cigarettes and white people doing this, and no black faces on billboards. And we finally get a block away from the church, and I see a black face on a fence. A poster. It's actually a handbill, which you don't see very often, plastered on a fence line, and it's Floyd Patterson, and it's promoting a fight between Floyd Patterson and Ingemar Johansson at Yankee Stadium, and the date of this boxing match is June 1960. So I can remember the month and the year that I was having this conversation. And my dad said, and I said, Daddy, there it is. There's a black face. And Dad said, no, that's not a billboard, son. That's a handbill. And if you can read what it says next to it, and written next to it was post no bills. He said, no. He said, that's not only is it a handbill, it's an illegal handbill. You know, the police or somebody's going to tear down that handbill. So there were no black faces.
And so the racism was there.
It was the first time we really had a discussion. We had talked about the Little Rock, integrating the schools in Little Rock, and we had seen the demonstrations. And this was something I said, but Daddy, that's down south. You know, we're not down south. You know,
and a lot of people didn't understand the racism on the East Coast was. I mean, it was different. But it was still racism.
It was different, but it was still there. And, you know, my dad said, son, we live right across the street from a private beach club that does not admit black people. And he told me there was a woman who applied for a day pass, and they told her, you have to get a letter from the governor, from Nelson Rockefeller,
in order
to get a day pass in this. And my classmates all went to this beach club. And some of them would say, hey, you going down to the beach club and play some basketball or baseball or whatever? And then some of them say, no, he's black. They won't let in, you know.
And then when you see today, and as we look back today and we're looking at so much as racism it's just on the tip of everybody's tongue.
Yes.
And it's right there in the consciousness of everybody, even to this day, dealing with your Ferguson and the battles of the law enforcement and the racism of jobs and equality, and we're looking at. But at the same time, we have the first African American president.
Yes.
And it's that dichotomy of emotions that keep ringing there.
That's the word, the dichotomy.
Yeah, but I see what you are doing because you go to these schools. You are reaching out to kids of color globally.
Absolutely.
And do you find that? I guess this is going to be a really silly question, but
No.
When you see the enthusiasm of kids, it crosses racial barriers or concept when they are excited about the space program, is it not?
Absolutely. And if every child is given an equal chance, then boys and girls given an equal chance. One of my favorite stories is coming down to New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina. I did a Space Day show at a school in East New Orleans. I did another one in Jefferson City, just outside of New Orleans. There was a 9-year-old girl who said to me, "I want to go home with you. You live in California. Can I travel back to California with you?" And I said, "No, wait a minute. It doesn't work that way. Besides which, you've got to get permission from your parents and all this kind of stuff." And she, "Oh, well, Mom's right here." So I said, "Well, what's going on? What is this wanting to come to California with Traveling Space Museum?" And she said, "Well, I want to learn to be an astronaut, but I also want to be on American Idol." And I thought, my God, when I was 9 years old, that was me.
Oh, yes.
I wanted a foot in both doors. I wanted to produce and perform, and I also wanted to be an astronaut. So this young girl became the youngest Traveling Space Museum protege.
Really?
Yes. And as it would turn out, she was a transfer student. She was totally displaced by Katrina. Her parents were living in a trailer, one of these FEMA trailers. And 2 years after Katrina, the city was still in turmoil. The cleanup, you would have thought the hurricane was a week ago.
Yeah,
and not 2
I was
years
down
ago.
there.
So you've seen the whole Gulf Coast was just, there were bed sheets in trees.
Yes.
2 years after the fact. But this young girl had immersed herself into reading as a coping mechanism. And just the idea of wanting to get away from it is what she was saying to me. So we arranged to send her to space camp in Florida 2 months after we met her. And she had a chance to have a reunion with extended family at the
What a
Kennedy
beautiful
Space
story.
Center. And she's just a wonderful kid. We have done something with her every year.
What's her name?
For the past 8 years. Amani McGee.
Amani McGee.
Amani McGee. As a matter of fact, I got a call from a friend, Willie Daniels, who has a program in Denver, Colorado. They're planning on this first black astronaut reunion in August 29th of this year. And the astronaut an astronaut had given Amani McGee, her mother, and I a tour of Johnson Space Center, and Nichelle Nichols also happened to be there.
Oh, wow.
So the entire tour of Johnson Space Center was documented by NASA in video and still photography. And everybody wanted to meet Amani McGee. They had heard about her experience with Katrina. And we also got her up in an airplane flying. She was a 9-year-old student pilot. And she's still taking flying lessons, and she's
wow.
So
what a lovely story. So
yes,
and this is just what touches my heart about it is that you can see the passion when young children have an opportunity.
Yes,
I mean all they're asking for is an opportunity, because one of the things we do here at the show is that we want positive images for all people. Positive messages for all people.
Absolutely.
But we have to have a little more sensitivity towards African American, because they're less likely to be exposed to situations like this. And then, what do you? I know you can't speak for NASA, but do you see NASA reaching out to more women in the space?
Oh, they are now. I can tell you. One of the stories that we talked about before we went on air was the fact that my friend Nichelle Nichols was hired by NASA in 1978 to recruit the first minority members of the space program, astronauts and females. Up until then, the NASA was the only organization that was not adhering to the Equal Opportunity Act. Carter had passed this law in 76, and by 1978, there still were no astronauts, black astronauts or female astronauts in training. And NASA had to admit that they had there was no outreach.
They failed at that.
And they said, well, it's a two-pronged problem. Yes, we're not doing it institutionalized. It's a good old boy network, so they're not inclined to want to reach out to minority members. And the feeling was, well, even if they did, nobody would respond. No one would believe them. And you wouldn't get the best of the best who would put their life and their career on hold on a bet. They needed to know that this was the real deal. So they hired Nichelle Nichols to go all over the United States, to go everywhere, anywhere that she wanted to go, unaccompanied by anyone with NASA, including the Pentagon. So
tell us a little bit about the story. You enlightened me about something about Nichelle Nichols and her role on Star Trek, that it wasn't just the pushback on her being African American, but it was you. Please, there's much has been said over the years about her being the first black woman in a non-stereotypical role. Up until Star Trek, black females on television and movies, they either played entertainers, maids, prostitutes. These were the roles for black women in Hollywood. It was funny because the original Star Trek script was purchased by Lucille Ball. Really?
Yeah, when you watch that, the next time you see Star Trek, you'll see the name Desilu.
I didn't know that.
That's Desi and Lucille Ball. And
so she had Michelle had a kind of a boss role in it. She had a leadership role.
She had a leadership role. Well, the thing was, Gene Roddenberry, who created the series, wanted the co-star to be a female, and he wanted that co-star to be the first mate. So he changed the concept from first mate to number one. So the idea that Spock could have been a woman, and Nichelle read for the role of Spock. But the networks were very skittish about not only having a black woman as a co-star, but the fact that Roddenberry wanted that woman to be an officer, which meant she would have outranked 500 men aboard that ship. So the idea of having her as an officer is really the biggest part of the pushback.
You know, I love that story because I've met her on several occasions. Just a wonderful human being. For the sake of time, I told you this is going to go by fast. Dr. Tyson.
Yes.
One of my favorite.
Oh, he's a great guy.
Tell me just a little bit about him.
A little bit about it. It's part of the crazy quirks of my own life. I lived across the street from him.
Get out of here.
Literally.
Tell people who Dr. Tyson is real quick. Just
Neil deGrasse Tyson, MIT, astrophysicist, the leading authority on space and space exploration, recent host of the Cosmos series.
Yes, African American.
Neil deGrasse, he grew up in the projects across the street from him.
I did. This is one of the most brilliant men.
Absolutely.
I sit back and listen to, and I know because this, I knew this time. I'm looking at my watch here, my clock here, because I'm up against the time because now with this new program, the computer was automatically kind of shut us off in about 5 minutes. So I got to ask you one question.
Absolutely.
The big white elephant in the room.
Yes.
is there intelligent life out there, and do they visit us? Is there spaceships that come to planet Earth?
I gotta tell you officially, Carl Sagan. Talk about Neil deGrasse Tyson. Tyson's mentor was Carl Sagan. Sagan said, "With extraordinary claims, there must be extraordinary proof." And I've had an astronaut tell me that he personally saw a UFO. Gordon Cooper, I got to know Gordon Cooper, was the youngest.
You got to know Gordon Cooper.
Got to know Gordon Cooper. He was the last of the Mercury astronauts to go into space. Great guy. He endorsed the idea of the Traveling Space Museum. I got to tell Gordon Cooper about the idea of the Traveling Space Museum. And he said, "You put together a Traveling Space Museum, I will back you."
We have a call. Would you put on your headphone there for a second?
Okay.
Yeah. Caller, thank you for calling. I'm just having such a wonderful time here. Who am I speaking to?
Hi, Larry. It's Elaine.
Hey, how you doing, Elaine? Thanks for calling.
Hi, Elaine.
I have to tell you that I am so enthralled with this whole interview with Mr. Dawson. I find it incredibly interesting. And one thing that I would like to know is how would a school get in touch with the Traveling Space Museum to get to have them come to a school? I'm thinking in terms of my own grandchildren in Texas.
Absolutely. Well, you can contact me through the station or my my website, travelingspacemuseum.org.
Yeah. And for the sake of time, I'll give you the information as well. And thank you for calling. This is at the last minute. We have about 2 minutes left for the show. And Elaine, thank you so much for calling. And I know you think about those lovely grandkids of yours down there in Austin, Texas. Am I right?
I'm fascinated by it. I would love to see if I could be a part of it.
Yeah.
Absolutely awesome. I'm loving every second of the show.
I would be at South by Southwest if I didn't have this radio commitment.
Okay, so thank you so much, and Elaine, and so we're gonna have to say goodbye because the time is up on us right now.
Say it ain't so.
Okay.
Yes, thank you so much. That is God. We could go on with this. People are gonna like this show. Call me, text me, email me, and get in touch with Traveling Space Museum. And one more little bit of thing. We got about 2 minutes. The space.
Yes.
The gentleman that you got to explain this to, that he believed he was an astronaut that believed in space.
Gordon Cooper.
Gordon Cooper.
Gordon Cooper had two experiences with UFOs. When he was in the military in 1951, he was flying a squadron of Sabre jets over Europe when they saw a cluster of strange lights. And then in the 1960s, he saw something land in the desert. And he was convinced that there were
so he kind of went on a campaign.
He went on a campaign. He actually wrote letters to the United Nations asking for a unified investigation of all the learned individuals around the globe.
I'll have to cut you off there. Give us one. Thank you so much, Ivor Dawson, for coming up, because you're gonna come back on the show, right?
I'm yours.
You got to come back on the show. Give us a good words of wisdom to say goodbye with.
I want everyone considering these days to go out and vote. We started the show talking about the need to vote. My wife and I voted for our city council. We were the only people on our street to vote.
Well, we're gonna you listen to the young man, and that this is the I got to shut off now. I always end the show. Stay in space, even though you're planted on the earth.
Absolutely.
This is the Larry Exazia Show. Remember, a nation can rise no higher than it elevates its woman. Thank you, Mr. Ivor Dawson, for coming on to the Larry Exazia Show. Thank you, guys. See you next week.
Thank you for having me.
Well, actually, I'm leaving town next week, but you'll get it.
Everybody